Hello there and welcome to PM Express. Rage, surprise and utter shock. These are some of the reactions greeting the latest Auditor-General report on the public accounts of Ghana, focusing this time on ministries, departments and other agencies for 2021 alone. Joy News, in fact, has found countless remarks in this voluminous document to conclude that financial irregularities and other corrupt practices are beginning to weigh heavily on the state coffers like never before. Well, if you doubt me, let's get to it and let me just give you a sense of what's happening to the state coffers. So we start off from the amount in question, 17.4 billion Ghana cedis. That's how much we're talking about tonight as the weighing down of some of these financial irregularities on our state coffers. This is a significant amount because it's an increase about 5 billion more from where we were last year. And we'll be painting that picture to you because no sector has been spared in the exercise that we're doing tonight. So we start off with a 4.6 billion increase for the 2021 year. And the Auditor-General is actually blaming all of this on one of these sectors, which has got to do with VRA and NETCO, Volta River Authority, and, of course, the Northern Supplier of Energy. We'll get into the nitty-gritties, but because this is a very bulky document, we'll try and summarize everything for you. So just paint that picture that we're surging some 4.6 billion more than we were doing last year, and this is all being attributed to this energy sector shortfall of 6 billion. Now, we also need to, first of all, lay that background to you to say that when we're talking about financial irregularities, that may not necessarily mean that the monies have been embezzled. It could also be the fact that the funds were misappropriated. So you need to keep that at the back of your mind. But however, and regardless of whatever terminologies you may want to use, it's costing the taxpayer and it's beginning to weigh us down as a nation. So beyond that, the picture of the national image in terms of how much we're losing as a state, there's also a need for us to give you a sense of where and how far-reaching the report of the Auditor-General has been. We do recall that late last year we're moving post-COVID. It's not as though the virus is gone, but then that was an era, of course, where government expenditure was heavily reliant and pro-poor, if you want to call it as such, distribution of some freebies and other factors which were of topmost priority to government. So, for instance, we do recall that the president set up the COVID-19 Trust Fund to try and rake in some funds and also to disburse into some of the priority areas that will be part of our national fight against the pandemic. It's emerging tonight, and as we're pointing out to you, that some 250,000, a little over 254,000, has not been properly accounted for. And part of the reasons for which this is happening is because we're spending, for instance, on protective equipment. Of course, that was topical during the COVID-19 era because you do recall that some of the health services workers were in fact complaining about the fact that they don't even have the PPEs to work with. So how is it the case that we're finding the COVID-19 National Trust Fund not being able to account for some 254,000 Ghana cedis? In fact, we do know that the cost that is being put to some of the protective equipment in itself is being questioned because as to how much we're paying for the nose mask and who's getting the contract, all of these things have come into sharp focus. But that's not all tonight because, in fact, some other sectors will shock you. We'll be getting to that. But take a look at, first of all, the trajectory, where we've come from and where we are today. Stark difference, moving from 12 billion in terms of how much financial irregularities have cost the state. Some 12 billion, we managed to just cut it down in just a year after 2017 to some 3 billion. Then it began to surge. In 2019, 5.4 billion, and 2020 as well, of course, we made another stride again. It's not a good news, but in terms of the table, we've shot up again to 12.8. The hope was that with measures, adequate measures being put in place, would have been prudent enough in saving the taxpayer. But that has not happened. In fact, we're ranging between some 4.6 billion as we are pointing to you tonight, and the total amount that's weighing us down is some 17.4 billion Ghana cedis. That's where we are now, 2021, in the latest Auditor-General report, and it's beginning to trigger a lot of reactions from some civil society organizations that are yet to take some civil action. We'll tell you about that shortly, but there's also a need for you to put this in mind as well. Yesterday, we brought you that story about some 19 vehicles which were auctioned to some members of the judiciary, including judges as well. Some of the figures clearly indicate that you wouldn't even find anyone in the private sector, regardless of how tired they are in terms of using some of the brands of vehicles that are unfolding, selling them as cheap as 17,000 Ghana cedis. In fact, we'll point out that to you, but you need to know that some 19 officials have been a beneficiary of that non-performing auction process, which is being questioned by the Auditor-General. It's amounting to some 1 million cedis in all for the 19 vehicles, but the type of vehicles will amaze you. Take a look at it. Toyota Land Cruiser, 6 of them, and the total amount being paid there as part of the auction is 448,000 and some 83 Ghana cedis there. That's an amount that would not, in fact, pay for 2 of the number of vehicles that we're talking about here. There are some who even go ahead to talk about how much you pay to even clear the car, the 2017 model of the Toyota Land Cruiser, when you import them into Ghana. That would not amount certainly to the 448,000 that this car is being given out to some judges and members of the judiciary. So it's beginning to raise a lot of eyebrow. You can see the story here. The trajectory is nothing to write home about. Some Avalon Saloon cars, Toyota Corolla, also 4 of them being sold as 37,000 Ghana cedis. So it's beginning to be a lot more of an eye-opener for us to get a sense of what's happening in the public sector. Aside the judiciary as well, we do know, and this is the big shocker, because government is also being indicted here, some 4.3 billion Ghana cedis, which was meant to be paid to the Social Security Insurance Trust, is nowhere to be found. It's not as though the money has been embezzled, except that, legally speaking, your pensions are supposed to be paid. So for those of you who find yourself in the formal sector, particularly in public service, government is not releasing this amount to SNIT, which is supposed to insure you when you go on pension. So where's the money? Well, the story is a long one, but all we do know is that SNIT itself has gone into some arrangements with government so as to find that amount to cushion the trust. That's how bad the story is tonight. And beyond that as well, if you're talking about SNIT, they've also been in hot waters in terms of the Auditor-General's report. Take a look at it. 45 unlisted equity companies, of course 10 out of the 45 of the unlisted equity companies of SNIT who have actually invested, where SNIT has actually invested for the last 10 years, a lot of them, 10 of them have been non-performing, which means that in the last 10 years, some of the ventures within which we found SNIT making some investments so as to yield more profit and to make the trust more attractive is not yielding any results. And it's part of the reasons for which the Auditor-General believes, well, we need to question you on that. Cocoa Board as well appears to be in this as well, 2.25 billion. And this time around, the shortfall is not from their side, but on the side of government. Obviously, we do know that government is in dire need for cash, so that 2.25 billion is also of question here. But today as well, we brought you another revelation, and it's as though the story continues to unfold, so we would not be able to exhaust all of them tonight, but there's also the education sector. Premier universities, top-tier universities, 2 of them, public ones, KNUST and the University of Ghana. It was a shocker when many of us heard about it, but if you're also out there, of course, the claim is that your certificates may be at risk, because get what? About 374 programs are having their accreditation tagged as expired, which means that at the time you are running that course in the university, if you do find yourself within that time range, obviously it would mean that there are implications for your certificate. And, well, the academics and experts and lawyers are beginning to give varied opinion on this, but 374 is quite significant. And here's the breakdown in terms of diploma: 14 of them, undergraduate programs 80, and then postgraduate 23, with PhD programs also included in the 67. So it cuts across all the tiers in terms of tertiary education. And we do know that for KNUST, for instance, 61 out of the 360 programs being offered have some challenges. So only 61 of them are accredited as a shortfall of that 360 programs being run at KNUST. These are some of the shocking revelations we're getting. But beyond that as well, in fact, some of the public officials working within the universities itself are being questioned, because the Auditor-General, for instance, is finding out that, guess what, 488,000 Ghana cedis was expended as double salary that was paid to some staff of this university who took a sabbatical leave, a long period of time, left the premises of the school, and then took on another government job just to get paid again. So these are some of the findings, and stark revelations. UG has not been spared out of this, and it's beginning to trigger a lot of reaction and sentiment, even amongst, of course, the ordinary citizen. But civil society is beginning to take that up, asking the Auditor-General to trigger the surcharge and also try as much as possible to recover at least some of the amounts that we've lost, 17.4 billion in terms of financial irregularities. Will that happen? Well, we'll wait to see what will happen. But for now, we're certain that, of course, the Coalition for Democratic Accountability and Inclusive Governance would have all of the civil society groups come under one umbrella just to mount that pressure on government to try and act, and not necessarily government, but this time around, that independent constitutional body, which is the Auditor-General's office, to try and save the situation for us as a nation. But we're asking, will this ever end? That's the conversation we're having on PM Express. Be my guest. Welcome back to PM Express. Let me tell you about my guest for tonight. Ibrahim Murtala Mohammed is a member of parliament, also on the Public Accounts Committee. He's represented there, so he'll be helping us with the discussion. Joining us via Zoom, Dr. Eric Odrosai, Director-General, Internal Audit Agency. His institution is critical to this conversation, and he'll be starting off for us. So, Doc, just prepare for that. Professor Bafo Ajimandia is a former Senior UN Governance Advisor, and Mary Ada is Programs Manager, Ghana Integrity Initiative. My very good friend, Adam Senanu, is co-chair of the Citizens Movement Against Corruption. Already they are lacing their boots to hit the offices of the Auditor-General. We'll talk about that shortly, Adam. But let me start off with you, Dr. Odrosai. The belief is that if we had put in place all of the measures internally by checking financial procedures, all of this would have been dealt with. Well, I'm told that Dr. Odrosai will be joining us shortly, so I'll shelve that for now and start off with Honorable Murtala Mohammed, who is in studio with us. Good evening to you, sir. Welcome to our studios.
Well, good evening, and good evening to your cherished viewers, and most important.
Right. We need to, first of all, lay that background that this report that we're talking about has not been laid before Parliament, correct?
Yes, it hasn't. We are looking at the 2019 Auditor General's report, but it is important for me to set the stage by explaining what Parliament does with regards to the report submitted by the Auditor General. Every institution where state funds are used, public institutions, they have internal auditors. I believe that even as private entities, you have your own, internal auditors. The internal auditor's responsibility is to ensure that monies that are expended within the ambit of law. There are certain laws that guide how state resources are used in public institutions. The Public Management Act, you talk of the procurement law, and even the Constitution. These laws are very important. So every expenditure that is done is supposed to be regulated by the internal auditor. But at the end of the year, you have external auditors who come. If you have a state institution that is cited in a particular district, the district auditor is the head of the auditing team for the purposes of auditing what is being expended by state institutions. They also come to look at your books, they have what we call the conference, where they sit to tell you that these are the infractions we have identified. You are given the opportunity to respond to some of the infractions they have identified, having looked at your books. Now, having done that, there is something they call the management letter. The management letter will tell you the position they have taken. So there are processes by which you would have to respond to some of the queries or infractions that they have identified. After which they then submit this to the Auditor-General. After the Auditor-General compiles his report, he submits it to Parliament. Then the Speaker would then refer it to the appropriate committee, in this case, the Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee would also give you an opportunity, or the institution which is cited in the Auditor-General's report, to come before the committee to explain why you think that the Auditor-General was wrong in citing you for an infraction, or to explain why ABCD happened. All these processes take place. Now, what the Public Accounts Committee does is to give you this opportunity. And after that, we make our recommendation to plenary. Then plenary takes a decision. If there are prosecutions that ought to be done, it is referred to the Minister for Justice and Attorney General for prosecution. Over the years, we have had about 10 years. You remember some years ago, 10 years backlog that you would have to look at them. By the time you start even looking at a particular year, those who have been identified for such infractions, some of them are either dead, some have retired, or some are no longer at the institution. So we decided that this particular Public Accounts Committee want to clear the backlog. Last year, we did 2017-2018 report. We are currently looking at the 2019. And because people were moving from other parts of the country to Accra, someone could be cited for 500 Ghana cedis. You find 2-3 officers traveling to Accra.
And they are spending more.
We have decided to zone the nations. So the 5 northern regions take place in Tamale. The Bunu regions, Ashanti region, they take place in Brunhafo. Western, Central, and Western North in Takoradi. Then you have Volta, Oti region, Greater Accra, and Eastern region in Ho. That's what we do. Now, we did the 2017, 2018, but because we want to clear the backlog, we, the members of the committee, we are not resting. When others are in their constituencies and others are resting now for the purposes of coming to start work, we are working. The attrition rate, the number of members of parliament who lose their seat on the Public Accounts Committee is more than any other committee.
So it's part of the reasons why you're not able to advance. But how close?
So now what we are doing? Yeah,
how close are you to achieving?
And the only time we can do that is when we are on recess. So we, in fact, next week by Sunday, we are going to Volta region to do that of Volta and then Eastern and OT and Greater Accra. Then from there, we'll move straight to Takoradi for Western, Central and Western North for the 2019. We intend that once Parliament comes and there's a recess, we'll try and do the 2020 and 2021 report so that by next year, we wouldn't have this backlog. So this particular committee is working tirelessly at the expense of our comfort, at the expense of even our constituencies to ensure that we clear the backlog so that we will no longer have some of these problems done. What is important and instructive of what we are doing in this committee, over 100 state institutions, MMDCs and other state institutions have been referred to the Minister for Justice and Attorney General for prosecution. We have also indicated that next year we shall be inviting the Minister for Justice and Attorney General to come and tell us why they have not been able to prosecute those who were referred to them for prosecution. They should give us reasons. I believe if we begin to demanding answers from the Minister for Justice and Attorney General, I think that is
and I also need to state that we'll be expecting, in as much as we're commending you for clearing the backlog, we'll be expecting that you deal with that expeditiously so we can move to 2021 because the figures are staggering. And let me bring you in, Professor Bafo Ajimandia, the issue about the amount involved. Some 17.4 billion Ghana cedis. That's how much of a toll it's taking on the public purse. What was your initial reaction when you began to pick up some of the red flags in this latest report?
Well, thank you. Let me begin by thanking Mr. Motala for giving that very beautiful background to all this. And that has really kind of softened my stance because technically, this report that we are going to discuss has not really gone through all the processes.
Yes.
So, which means that people who are accused of misappropriating or causing some irregularities haven't had the chance to really explain before Parliament. So we have to be cautious how I think we deal with this. Having said that, certainly we are all very much concerned that over the years, these reports come out and we read staggering figures of amounts that have been mishandled by public officials. And what Mr. Murtala said, that is quite pleasing to me, is the new resolve of Parliament to really begin to focus on this and making sure that the processes for accountability are effective. Because I believe strongly that this is coming every year only because there is no system to hold these public officials accountable. Systems may be there, but they are not enforced. And therefore, every year we come out with these reports and nothing happens. So certainly I'm concerned, like any other citizen of this country, that our resources are being poorly managed, poorly applied. And I think it's better we find a way to stop this as soon as possible.
Prof, you're very familiar with these terms, that corruption is as old as Adam and Eve. Is that applicable in this case?
Yeah, it's been said by one of our former presidents.
Right.
I know where you're coming from.
Right.
You see, I have a strong sense that in this country, what I may call the political and bureaucratic elite seems to have captured the state. And these people tend to have very strong sense of entitlement. That is to say that public officials seem to believe that they're entitled to kind of a privileged living in this country. And therefore, they tend to shirk their responsibility for effective supervision, their responsibility for holding their subordinates accountable, and on and on and on. So that in the end, we come out short of expectations in terms of people who have been entrusted with the affairs of this country, how they've been managing our fiscal affairs. So basically, it's a problem of governance in the fiscal area, fiscal governance at all levels. I think latest reports are indicating that, I think he said so,
right,
that even at the local level, if you look at the local assemblies, billions of cedis. I read today about 2.5 billion cedis that are not fully accounted for. And of course, across the state institutions, you find this happening all the time. So I think there's a complete breakdown of accountability at all these levels. And they are broken down because nobody is bringing people to book. So I'm happy that at least according to Mr. Murtala,
right,
new efforts are being made to ensure that all the way to the Attorney General, he will question as to why they are not taking the necessary steps to ensure people account for their stewardship of our resources.
And in fact, one of the issues I would want to find out from Murtala shortly would be comparing the notes and finding the traits of some of these financial irregularities in terms of what the Public Accounts Committee is noticing having moved around the country. So we'll talk about that shortly. But let me bring in Mary Ada as well. The issues about transparency. The COVID period was one of the areas where, of course, your organization raised some red flags about how government was not being transparent. Even with the COVID expenditure, we're getting to see, for instance, for the very first time, that even the COVID-19 National Trust Fund has issues. Some over 200,000 Ghana cedis not being properly accounted for. These were some of the issues you were concerned about, right?
Exactly. So good evening to you, your listeners, and then our viewers, and then the panelists. One of the key things we have spoken to extensively in the past is the lack of sunshine in some of these expenditures that have resulted in the lack of trust and also the credibility around the spending. COVID as well added to it because therein governments and institutions had free rein of course, because they could go in because they thought it was emergency, and so they left the procurement law and other legislations and decided to do what they wanted. And after COVID, we have done a report that has shown a corruption risk assessment that has shown that the health sector particularly was one that showed significant lapses in not observing the various regimes that we had. Unfortunately for us, our assessment showed that if you put all the agencies together, the COVID-19 Trust Fund was one of those which had shown some level of transparency in their receipt of the various goods, the donations that came to them, and in their expending of same. And you could go to their website and find information that you wanted. And they were also one of the groups which were very much accessible to us whenever we asked them for meetings. But yet, you realize that there are still issues. That goes to tell you the ownership mentality and sometimes the way public servants decide to behave because they've been entrusted with power, forgetting that that power that they've been entrusted with comes with certain responsibilities that are to ensure that they hold those offices in high esteem, they are accountable and answerable to the people who put them there, and that is the ordinary citizen. Unfortunately, most of our public servants do not see that as so. And so you realize that even going in to request for information with the RTI law, many of them still would even refuse you. You would have to go for appeal with the commission before you have a hearing. And so it's not surprising that the Auditor-General has come up with some of these damning findings. It's really what we continue to see over the years. And if you look at his analysis, he even presents a trend of sorts. And in the trend, you see some of the violations and infractions that also go to show that we have a lot of weaknesses when it comes to internal controls. For that matter, the level of superintending and oversight played by the internal audit agency at the various levels and sectors.
And in fact, we'll be hearing from Dr. Odrosai shortly. But is it just the issue of sunshine? Because some are of the opinion that regardless of the mechanisms, in fact, just to take a look at it, the Vice President has been talking about the use of technology to check grafts in public service. In spite of the mechanisms, it's still not working. So it's as though when you find a new strategy to check graft, the public sector will find a way of avoiding that.
Certainly, that is one of them. Sunshine is one of them. Accountability is the other. But then one of the things we continue to talk about is the lack of sanctions that are following some of these inactions. And so you would realize that people do things and they get away with them. The political will to ensure that people are sanctioned for their inactions is not there. And you realize that the Auditor-General's report comes out with recommendations such as, and I recommend that the head of entity put in place mechanisms to recover the money. Excuse me, that is not enough. It is seriously inadequate. When the Auditor-General has powers to disallow, he has powers to surcharge. He has powers to ensure that whatever he wants done to recover these monies is done within the law. So for us, we believe that because people are not sanctioned enough, and it's not just by the Auditor-General, it's also at the official level when it comes to the audit committees, which I believe Dr. Eric Odrosai should be speaking to as well, because we have audit committees that have been constituted that are supposed to ensure that some sanctions are meted out to people who have been cited in these reports. Again, let me say that Parliament's role in all of this, Muntala has been speaking eloquently about it, but then the delay in some of the hearings, he says they are now doing 2019.
Yes, so, with the hope that they'll clear the rest and then we can move into 2021.
That is right. the rhetoric we have also heard from Parliament over time. And so that time lag as well is not too good for the promotion of sunlight and accountability and also sanctions. Then it sometimes becomes, people move on, people transition, and then it becomes difficult to even track who was the culprit in this case. So the Parliament, as well, the Public Accounts Committee needs to sit up.
And I'm grateful that you're raising this point, because even before we get to the parliamentary level, you're talking about the power of surcharge with the Auditor-General possesses. Of course, you in the civil society, including the citizens' movement against corruption, you share the same opinion on this. So let's hear from Adam as well. The power to surcharge. Yes, you may blame the current Auditor-General for it, but the belief is, with the kind of support we've seen from civil society backing the likes of Daniel Yaw-Domelevo when he was in office, the argument is you're not giving that same support. And probably it's the reason why the Auditor-General does not have that confidence to go out and to surcharge. You agree with me?
A very curious way of putting it, Blessed. Obviously not.
Yeah.
I mean, we've written to him several times, encouraging him to, as it were, fulfill the obligation he has. It's an obligation. It's not a choice he makes as to whether he should do it or not. I think in the last 24 hours, I have seen some correspondence which shows that he has now decided to respond to some of our earlier mails. Mary, am I right?
Yes, he has responded, and I think they are trying to get us to
meet and decide what to do.
Yeah.
So the Auditor-General is throwing that invite to civil society?
No, all of a sudden, I mean, after months of not responding to any of our correspondence, now that we've decided to pick it on Monday, we've received a response, I think, today, if I'm right. And so we are now thinking of whether to consider it. But the bottom line simply is that there is no way without enforcement or sanctions that you're going to get the system to change. One of the questions on my mind, and I think all the speakers have raised this, is at the moment, beyond the surcharging and the retrieval, what is the nature of the sanctions if you decide to not comply with existing law, or you do not follow due diligence in doing a process? Have we defined those sanctions? Because I get a feeling that the audit report implementation committees probably do not have a framework to insist on sanctions that hold public officers accountable. And perhaps we need to review that part of our regime to have stiffer sanctions clearly spelled out so that public officers don't get away with all of this. And then we come back every year and have a long discussion about it. But definitely, we are looking forward to getting the Auditor-General to perform his function. So far, he has not performed that function, and we think that it is totally unacceptable.
Why not laying the blame squarely at the doorsteps of Murtala and Co. at the Public Accounts Committee?
Oh, because the Supreme Court ruling on this matter is clear. It's not a matter of Parliament or the legislation. The legislation has already been done. It's been tested in court. The Supreme Court has made a ruling. You've had an Auditor-General who applied it, and I think he had in excess of, was it 66 million Ghana cedis retrieved at the time. We're expecting a continued effort in that direction. It really does not make sense that you suddenly have an Auditor-General who just is like he's suggesting the money should be retrieved, money should be paid back, caution should be taken, the officer in charge. I mean, that kind of language won't get us anywhere. Absolutely not. So it has nothing to do with Parliament on that score. I mean, there are other issues we can pick up with regard to the delay in clearing the backlog, but with regard to surcharging, which then begins to serve as a deterrent, because people know that I will be held accountable, I'll be compelled to pay back. Therefore, I should be more careful and cautious about ignoring the laws that exist.
And in fact, the coalition you formed has put out some timelines to taking civil action. We'll get into all of that. But let me bring in Murtala at this point. The issue about surcharge. One would say that if you are within the structures of the audit service when Domelevo was there, and then you rise now to become the substantive Auditor-General, you'd be mindful about exercising that power of surcharge, because obviously the circumstances leading to his exit from office would give you that lesson to say, well, just finish up the report, give it to Parliament. At least you have the political capacity to deal with some of the infractions.
Well, I don't think that we would want to compromise, the right things that ought to be done. on the altar of the fear that you may be booted out as, Mr. Domilevo was booted out. Everybody in this country knows that it was politically motivated, and that is the sad aspect of it. But let me just quickly tell Mary that these actions we are taking as a committee is not the usual rhetorics. And that is why I've indicated that whereas our colleagues who are supposed to be resting others going to their constituencies, we are working. When we go to Volta region next week, spend a week there, then go to Takoradi for another week. Right. So by next 2-3 weeks, we would have been done with the 2019. And once we are done with the 2019, until Parliament comes back, we cannot lay the report. So it is our belief that by the time we come back to Parliament, the report would have been ready. But you see, let me state this. If you look at the 2018 report we did, Francis Esiang, that is the cylinder company.
Ghana Gas. Oh,
the cylinder
company, right.
The company was actually referred to the Minister for Justice and Attorney General for prosecution. It was adopted by Parliament. In fact, the committee, our report was that she should be prosecuted for some of the infractions. There were outrageous procurement breaches, and we think that they should. When we went to plenary, regardless of our political differences, the report was adopted, and therefore the Minister for Justice ought to have started the prosecution. It's getting to 3 months. Nothing has been heard about it. So Parliament will do its work. Parliament doesn't have the capacity to prosecute. The only institution with prosecutorial powers is the Minister for Justice and Attorney General. And that is why we have indicated that next year we shall be inviting the Minister for Justice and Attorney General to come and explain to us why they have not been able to prosecute. They should give reasons to the people of this country. We are not able to prosecute ABCD because of 1, 2, 3 reasons. But you see, all the reports we have looked at, there are several factors that occasion some of these problems. Either the capacity of internal auditors are not up to speed. There are finance officers who simply know zero about public procurement laws. And these are laws that are available to the assemblies, the metropolitan, municipal, and district assemblies. The recklessness with which people expend state resources, for me, is extremely worrying. But you have been talking about the COVID funds, and for which reason some of the problems that we have. Why is it that you journalists are not interested in finding out why we are now paying the COVID levy? I filed a question in Parliament for months now, wanting to know from the Minister of Finance how much we have generated as a state as a result of the COVID levy. We were told that we're given freebies. We are now being told to pay, and everything you purchase, there is a COVID levy. I have filed a question wanting to know how much we have generated, because that particular levy was put in there for the purposes of the freebies they gave us, for the purposes of the COVID. We are paying the money. We do not know whether we have finished paying for that particular, freebies they gave us. And if we are finished, is it legal for government to continuously taking these taxes or imposing these taxes on the people of this country? And that is where I will urge you and the civil society organizations to also add their voice. I would still demand to know, because that question can only be answered by the minister for...
Some would say that you have the opportunity, of course, the Speaker's directive on probing further the issues of COVID-19 expenditure. That opportunity will provide itself when the ad hoc committee is set up.
No, that's different.
You want to take advantage of that? You could put across the question,
well, that's different from the question app. And we have seen too many of this. You put question, the minister, particularly Minister for Finance, the morass of disrespect that this particular minister gives to Parliament is just unacceptable. He either comes appeared condescending, or sometimes they simply do not come. You would follow up and they don't respond. And I think that Parliament needs to act and act swiftly. We are asking the question for and on behalf of the people we represent, for and on behalf of the people of this country. Is it legal and is it fair that we are continuously paying taxes, which was instituted or imposed in the first place, to take care of something, assuming that we have finished paying the monies that for which these levies were imposed? Yet we continue to,
for the sake of time, whenever this conversation comes up, the fixation appears to be on the political class. But we're learning from the document that even some public servants are also engaged in graft. And of course, you've been going around the country. Yeah, we'll get to the specifics. You've been going around the country. What forms and traits do some of these irregularities take, of course, when you are engaging the people?
Sometimes outright, lack of capacity. I'll give an example. We're looking at the 2017 report. I'm not sure whether 2007 or 2018. One particular district, you had a commercial bank that was occupying a state bungalow, a facility belonging to the district. And that commercial bank was paying 20 Ghana cedis a month. 20 Ghana cedis. Yes, about 2 bedrooms.
That's unbelievable.
20 Ghana cedis a month. And they were in arrears for 2 years.
Even with the 20 cedis?
Yes. Arrears for 2 years. And you find people who occupied state properties. Some paid 10 cedis. Some paid 15 cedis. I think the highest we had was 100 Ghana cedis. And they are even in arrears. It is the responsibility of someone to ensure that those monies are paid. It is the responsibility of someone based on the Public Financial Management Act to ensure that those things are done. But you see, that is why we are insisting now that any procurement breaches, in fact, if you look at the 2018, reports we had, every single procurement breaches will not even go further in asking questions. The chairman, Honorable Aveji, will refer that to the Minister for Justice and Attorney General. And that was the reason why we had over 100 state institutions being referred to the Minister for Justice and Attorney General. We are promising that next year, the Minister for Justice and Attorney General would have to appear before Parliament to tell us whether they
Why next year, though?
Because the recommendation is made this year.
Right.
We expect them to prosecute. So by next year, we expect that at least by next year, prosecutions should have taken place. If prosecutions are not taking place, the Minister for Justice and Attorney General would have to explain to the people of this country why those prosecutions are not done. So one of the challenges are, one, the capacity of officers who man the affairs of this. Two, sometimes sheer internal problems.
Right.
I'll give you an interesting example.
Okay.
There was a particular individual who appeared who had problems with the coordinating director. And then I joked, because this was public, I joked, are you sure it doesn't have to do with a girl?
Right.
And then we laughed over it. After the sitting, the gentleman approached me and said it had to do with a woman.
Oh, so some public servants are fighting over women in the office.
I mean, interesting. And these things are things that I tell customers.
Things are turning personal.
That gentleman told, I mean, we couldn't. I was just looking, and I jokingly, unconscious, I said, coordinating director and the gentleman, don't you think it has to do with a woman?
Right.
Then we laughed over it. After the sitting, I went out, I was going to use the washroom, and the gentleman approached me and said, it's true, it has to do with a woman. So there are a lot of factors. Another example, in the Auditor-General's report, a particular institution, in fact, one district was cited for an infraction that was about 420,000 Ghana cedis. One actual fact, when they appeared, we realized it was 42,000 Ghana cedis.
So sometimes there could be some,
and that is why anytime we have the public sitting, the district, auditor is there. If you are looking at any district, the regional auditor is there. The Auditor-General's representatives are also
joined
there.
you.
And I have had the cause to have had a discussion with the acting Auditor-General that it will be good for them and good for Public Accounts Committee to quantify monies that people have paid because they are dreading to appear before the Public Accounts Committee. And that is amounting to...
And of course, this is also one issue I want all of you to have your take on. The fact that people who are supposed to know better in aiding save some money into the public purse are not doing so. Professor Duya, I want to take your thoughts on the judiciary particularly. Their issue has come up. Some justices of the court benefiting from auctions. If you look at the amount involved, generally speaking, if someone was offering you a Land Cruiser for some 10,000 Ghana cedis, I'm not sure you'd willingly accept that. You question that. But in terms of our auction, our public servants are willingly taking that. And of course, be mindful of the fact that the Office of the Special Prosecutor wants to look into that. So just take it away. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I hope the Office of the Special Prosecutor really takes up. This is not new. It's been part of our system for decades. Most senior public officials do walk away with such material, vehicles at basement prices. It's not new, and it's not only limited to the justices. All senior public officials, university vice chancellors, government agency CEOs and their deputies, you can name them, and it's been going on for years. So it tells me that this is a system we have created to reward the bureaucratic and the political elite. So if you want really to be serious about it, then we have to simply create a new system that will prevent that.
Yeah, aside prosecution, should we be looking at a law that will outrightly ban the sale of such vehicles?
Of course. Right now, there's nothing illegal about it. You can raise ethical issues about it because, as I think they've responded, they pay for it. Whoever auctioned them at those prices are the people who need to hold accountable. But the system itself is rotten. It's rotten. And here, if I can chip in here, when our friend from Parliament talked about going to the Attorney General to prosecute people and all, I chuckle a little bit. Because I know that there have been some voices raised about splitting the Justice Ministry from the Attorney General.
Right.
Attorney General who can be independent to prosecute. If you find a top political official, government official, having caused some damage to the nation, you take it to the Attorney General, and he's the only person in this country who can determine whether or not to prosecute. Nothing happens. So I think we have to be seriously looking at the systems that we have created that inherently are creating these challenges for us. Because if you don't change them, you can't bring anybody in there. And like I think our good friend
this is quite a controversial one. A controversial one I'm putting to you. The issue about the public service sector worker and the politician. What should our focus be more in terms of trying to track down financial irregularities?
If we have effective systems in place, and those systems require some monitoring and evaluation all the time, I think we can do better. But I believe currently our systems are porous. On top of that, we are afraid, like my friends have been saying, to enforce existing laws and regulations regarding the management of public resources. Nobody wants to do that. Okay? So, for me, if we do not change the system, it's going to be tough for us to really clean up this particular problem that we have.
Yeah. Mary, for you, how do we check that? The issue about auctions.
I believe we have clear guidelines. We need to ensure that all the auctioneers, government auctioneers, must be realistic. We know there are underhand dealings that go out there. We know the valuators of these vehicles as well. It's what they do. They go through a process and they buy. But then, is it ethically correct that you are assigned a vehicle and a vehicle that is next to new is sold at a ridiculous price, whilst we know that even when we import the second-hand vehicles, those which some of us can buy, the cost is that high.
Yeah.
The cost is that high. And so, as Prof has indicated, we need to put in place some firm measures to ensure that people do not get away so easily with this. And perhaps the legislation should be reviewed to stop people from taking this away. It doesn't make sense that you have used a car, you are going away, you want to take it. What about the person who replaces you?
Interesting question you're asking there. And of course, unfortunately, we're running out of time. So let me split the time between Adam and then Mutala. So Adam, just 30 seconds for you. What should we do about the auctions? 30 seconds, briefly.
I mean, we need to, the investigation must go on. Let's uncover what it is about the auction process that is being taken advantage of. What is the loophole? How do they manage to make sure that A can get this at a certain low price that then defeats, the common sense will understand that, look, this thing cannot be this value.
Right.
So we need to investigate and identify the loopholes. Then we'll be in a position to plug the loopholes. Meanwhile, if we find people who have been culpable,
right,
let's make sure that they are prosecuted.
We need to go. Mutala, for you?
Well, I want to humbly, differ from the position made by Prof. In the matter of this, auction vehicles purchased by the judiciary. There was something illegal about it. You can have the auction, but the Minister of Finance must give an authorization or approval. In this case, the Auditor-General's position is that authorization was not given. One would expect the due diligence ought to be done in accordance with law by the judiciary. Unfortunately, this was not.
What will you call for?
Well, I think that if you look at the rationale, a vehicle that was bought in 2017 and in 2020 auctioned to the person at, the Land Cruiser should be about $160,000, auctioned to somebody at 57,000 Ghana cedis. Is a problem. And that is why even Article 71 office holders, our position in Parliament is that, look, provide the necessary vehicles so that we can discharge our responsibility.
All right, then.
So that those, auctions are not done. And the auctions are done by saloon cars. My understanding is that you don't auction four-wheel vehicles to people.
Okay. And I'm sure that conversation will continue sometime later, but I'm grateful to you all for joining us here on PM Express. I am Blessed Sogah. We'll see you again, but for now, log on to myjoyonline.com for updates.